Producing production budgets. Now, from Junior Cert, you would have known that a budget is a plan for income and expenditure. But in this case, this is a plan for the amount of money that we're going to spend producing goods. And we're going to plan then how much money we think we're going to make from it. So this budget, and it's plural, okay, so budgets, plural, is divided into a number of different parts. So we start off with a sales budget. So this is how much money we think we're going to take in sales. This is what we're planning to take in sales. So this here we start with the sales quantity. So how many think we're going to sell? We'll multiply it by the price per unit, and that gives us the sales revenue, similar to what we would have seen before when we did CVP analysis and costing. So that gives us the total amount of money we're going to take in sales. So now we move on to the production budget. So the production budget is the amount we want to produce. And this is going to be in units. So how many units are going to produce? So we need to start off with how many do we think we're going to sell? And we don't need to make our opening stock because we've already made those goods. They're opening stock. So this is goods that we have left over from last year. So we're not going to have to make them. So we're taking them out. But we will have to make whatever closing stock we'd like to have. So the amount of goods we plan to have left over at the end, we will have to make those as extra goods. So we start off with the amount we want to sell, take away our opening stock, add our closing stock, and that gives us the amount of units of goods that we're actually going to produce. And that's going to be important for all of the costs that are going to happen to us during this year. So we start off with looking at how much will we spend on raw materials. So we start with our production and we say, so if we're going to produce 10,000 units, how many kilos or meters or liters, depending on what product we're making, go into every unit that we're going to produce. So that will give us the amount of kilos that we're going to need to use, okay, so the amount of materials we're going to use. We already have some raw materials left over from last year, so that's our opening stock. We don't need to go and buy those because I'm trying to work out how much I need to spend, okay? But I don't need to go and buy, my opening stock because I already have them, but I will need to buy the extra for closing stock to have left over at the end. So we'll take away my opening stock, add my closing stock, and that will give me the amount of kilos of raw materials, or it could be liters or meters, whatever I'm using, of my raw materials that I will need to go and buy. I multiply that by how much each kilo costs, or each liter or meter costs, and that gives me my raw materials cost, okay, so the total cost of all of my raw materials. So that's the figure I have at the end. So total raw materials cost, it's the same thing. I should have only had one of those two there. So that's the amount of money I'm going to spend on my raw materials. Now, I need to think about my labor cost budget. So how much will I need to spend on labor? So this is how much I spent on materials. Now I'm going to add on how much I'm going to spend on labor. And I start again from my production budget with the amount of units that I'm going to have to produce. So I have the amount I'm going to produce multiplied by how many hours of labor are put into making every product, and that will tell me the total amount of labor hours that I'm going to need to have to budget for this year. Multiply it by what the wage rate is, and that will give me my total labor cost. How much is the total amount I'll need to spend on wages this year? So that's my labor cost budget. And when I'm working at my manufacturing cost budget, I'll take into account the amount I'm going to spend on materials, plus the amount I'm going to spend on labor, and any other overheads that I might have. So overheads, remember, are just regular bills I have to keep my factory ticking over. So that'll be electricity and rent and all of those. Some of them will vary depending on the amount we produce, and some will be fixed, they'll be static, like for example the rent or the mortgage that we might have, or insurance. When I add all of those costs together, that'll give me the total cost of producing the goods I want to produce this year.